We are, of course, all still reeling from the tragic murders of three men in Reading at the weekend. Their deaths as a result of this terrorist attack, or suspected terrorist attack, I should say, were senseless, tragic, and of course a terrible loss for their families and communities. However, there's probably something you didn't realise about these men if you read the reports in any of the major newspapers or mainstream TV channels or BBC News. These victims were gay. How such a crucial link between the three men has been overlooked is particularly shocking, especially given June is Pride Month, which is meant to help celebrate the lives of people from the LGBT community. But one person this hasn't escaped, there was, of course, Douglas Murray, the associate editor of The Spectator. He has written a very powerful piece today where he says if the attacker from Saturday night had been a white skinhead or a neo-Nazi or had been wearing a big red MAGA hat, I am fairly confident that the gay press and all of the mainstream media would be crawling over every angle of this story by now with unparalleled fury. Douglas Murray joins me now. This is truly shocking, isn't it? The fact that the connection between these two men being gay, the fact that this terrorist, who I don't particularly want to talk much about, but came from Libya and is believed to have potentially had some homophobic views. I mean, it's very shocking that it's not being discussed by the mainstream media.
It is very shocking. Good to be with you, first of all, I should say.
Great to have you.
It is very shocking, and it's not at all surprising. We saw something very similar 4 years ago when Omar Mateen went into the Pulse nightclub in Orlando, Florida, and gunned down and killed 49 people at that gay nightclub. In the aftermath of that attack, there were so many people who wanted to say it has nothing to do with the fact that the guy in question swore allegiance to ISIS, has nothing to do with his background, has nothing to do with his religion or worldview. And in that occasion, by the way, there was a whole set of just fake news that got pumped around about that. And you know what? The Pride Parade in New York that happened only a few weeks later, the organizers of that parade had a big banner at the front and it said, "Republican hate kills." And you see, that's the problem. And that's what I think is going on here in the aftermath of the tragic, horrible attacks in Reading on Saturday night. The gay press and the mainstream press and the gay lobbying organizations like Stonewall are completely primed for what would happen if some, right-wing extremist went and killed some people, like that far-right maniac who put the bomb in the Admiral Duncan pub in Soho 20 years ago. They're completely primed for that, but they have no idea how to respond when something like Saturday night happens, and so they just cover it over. Stonewall, the most prominent gay rights campaigning group in the UK, has done amazing work in the past. Like all these groups, way off the rails now, and it sends out one tweet yesterday saying, we're sorry to learn that the victims from Saturday night were, quote, members of the LGBT community. No, they weren't. They were gay men. But anyway, we're sorry, they said, that to discover that they're members of the LGBT community, but, and I'm going to quote this, "We can't let Islamophobic, racist, and xenophobic rhetoric be used to divide us."
Unbelievable.
Well, nobody in public life in the UK has, or I imagine would use, like divisive rhetoric. But you see, this is the priority of this sort of group these days. Everybody dances to this absurd situation, in this absurd music in which you have to say, when certain crimes occur, when certain types of terrorism occur, we're all over it. And when other types occur, we just like to basically scuff our feet, cover over the traces, move on, and hopefully somewhere down the line pretend that it was some,꯫ Donald Trump supporter or something.
And you point out that the mainstream media is so concerned about being accused of being bigoted these days that actually, in a lot of cases, they're even too afraid to mention the fact that these three men were gay. And by the way, I actually hate the term LGBT as well. I just like referring to gay men. But actually, that's so wrong, isn't it? You've got local gay leaders in Reading talking about the impact that these men had on the community, and it being virtually ignored by the mainstream media. It's just astonishing.
Well, the first thing is, of course, this whole talk about community is highly divisive in itself. I actually think that people who pretend they're anti-division are being the most divisive in our society by pretending these people aren't, primarily, sons and brothers and friends,
teachers.
but members of the LGBT community. Tick. That's the one thing about their identity. I find it, as I happen to be gay myself, I find it enormously reductive and divisive and absurd to talk about human beings in this way. But yes, the mainstream press is worried, and it's not just worried. There are two components to this story which are the cause of the sort of let's move on as fast as we can. One is the sexuality of the victims, shameful as it is that in 2020, from whatever political direction, people would be trying to cover that over for convenience's sake. But more obviously in this particular case is the fact that the suspect, the man currently being held in police custody for these killings, is a man who was an asylum seeker from Libya. Now, one shouldn't have to do this caveat, but let's do it anyway. Obviously, most people who are asylum seekers don't arrive in Britain and then start knifing people to death in Reading's town centre. We know that, okay. But it's perfectly legitimate to say, I wonder if there was anything in this guy's background, as a couple of people who are acquainted with him say there was, which might have exacerbated a bit of that feeling. Maybe Libya, here's a heretical thought, maybe Libya in 2020 isn't quite as progressive on gay rights as the UK is. I just put it out there as a possible speculation. Well, what are we to do about that? In the eyes of the almost the entire establishment beliefs of our day, we're meant to say, well, you shouldn't point that out. You shouldn't say it. There's certainly no lessons to draw from it. And if you did draw any lessons from it, you'd just be being a bigot. And we basically are so juvenile in Great Britain now. We're so incredibly childish that we think we can't even trust ourselves to have a discussion about who might have been killed and who might have done the killing without, thinking we're going to go off on some weird rampage, xenophobic rampage. That's what all these groups of Stonewalls and all these crappy legacy gay organizations, this is all they're doing. They actually imagine that we, the British public, are so sort of knuckle-dragging Neanderthal that we can't even be told who did the killing, who the suspect is, what his background is, because we, the British public, might go and just start lynching people. It's a preposterous insult to the British public.
Well, it is. And also the gay press, which is so tied up in the London liberal media elite, are letting down gay folk as well, because if they're not going to talk about it, then certainly the mainstream media is not going to.
Well, that's right. I mean, if the so-called gay press aren't going to pay much attention, why should anyone else? It's a really interesting case, this. There's a thing called Pink News, a sort of legacy thing. It used to be a paper, now it's a sort of really degraded website, a sort of clickbait sort of thing, which the minute you open it, you get loads of adverts pop up and you can't use your computer again that day. It's a really run-down thing. But, these people are listened to by people. People imagine they are what they say they are when they say they're the gay, newspaper. This thing today, this website, it had no major news stories on the killings just 3 days ago in Reading. But it had 3 big stories attacking J.K. Rowling, Harry Potter author, for her alleged transphobia. And this is a constant of these people. The so-called LGBT community people, actually, they moved on from the L's years ago. They discovered they thought they were a bit sort of embarrassing, really. The G's were really embarrassing. The B's, they'd never really spent any time on. But they're really hot for the T's right now. The T's are just great for campaigning because you can push through all sorts of claims while saying you're just, campaigning for trans rights. And I'm all for trans rights, like the majority of the British public. But J.K. Rowling, you see, for instance, like me, and by the way, like the majority of the British public, certainly most women, don't want to call women people who menstruate. They'd like to say women, a word we used to have. We didn't used to think it was a swear word. J.K. Rowling points this out, and the big gay gatekeepers, the big gay policemen, go around saying J.K. Rowling is some beyond the pale transphobic bigot, so much so that Pink News and all the legacy gay press have to just run story after story about her because they know what to do about that. That's just hounding and trying to bully a really successful female author. They know what to do with that. They don't know what to do when a young Libyan asylum seeker stabs allegedly 3 gay men in Reading Centre on a Saturday night. They don't know what to do about that because they've got this whole multiculti quilt And this all suggests, as by the way, I've suggested for years, that the sort of multi-culti rainbow quilt actually isn't as straightforward as all that. I said in my most recent book, In the Madness of Crowds, which takes on each of these identity issues one by one, these things don't just rub along really easily. It's not just a matter of the L's and the G's and the B's just rubbing along with the T's, and the women all rubbing along with them, and all ethnic minorities all rubbing along really well with each other, including with all the LGBTs. It's not quite as straightforward as that at all. But those few of us who are willing to point that out and to say that the big guiding ethic of our time is deranging on its own terms and not up to scratch, we're told we're the ones that are spoiling the great big gay party. Well, I think the great big gay party is killed when people who are extremists of any stripe go around stabbing gay people. And I think it's spoiled when the gay press can't admit that that's what's happened. And I think it's spoiled even more when the mainstream media don't bother to pay attention to a really significant and horrific thing that happened only a few days ago in one of our major cities. These people would love it. They know exactly what to do if some Donald Trump supporter, sends out some tweet they don't like. Everybody in the UK, everybody in the world knows the name of George Floyd, who was so horrendously killed by that policeman in Minnesota. How many people are going to know the names of any of the 3 victims from Saturday night in Reading? We're being set up on programs that we cannot run, and we certainly can't run a society successfully and in a unified fashion with all of these muffles on us.
Absolutely fascinating analysis. I agree with every word. That is Douglas Murray, Associate Editor of The Spectator and author of the brilliant book, The Madness of Crowds.